Before anything else, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because that helps the content reach more people and ensures you don't miss any important update like this one that has just exploded in English football. A heavy story, packed with impact, that changes the landscape for two clubs and directly shakes up the market. The day began differently for anyone following Crystal Palace. What seemed like a controlled scenario, albeit a delicate one, turned into a real earthquake within a few hours. On one side, the contract situation of one of the team's pillars. On the other, an internal decision by the manager that, until then, had been kept away from the spotlight. Everything surfaced almost at the same time, and the impact was immediate. There were only 5 months left on Marc Guéhi's contract. For a long time, the most common reading was simple. He would see out the deal and, in the European summer, leave as a free agent, with total freedom to choose the next step in his career. Several clubs were watching that quietly, monitoring the situation in silence, waiting for the clock to run in their favor. But Manchester City decided to act in a completely different way. Instead of waiting, instead of stepping into an open fight months later, the club chose to accelerate the process. The idea was clear from the start: solve now a problem that had already been identified. City's defense had been suffering with injuries. There was a lack of depth, a lack of a ready-made piece who could arrive and play. And that was where Guéhi's name shifted from a future opportunity to an immediate priority. The information started to gather real momentum when Crystal Palace's manager was questioned in a press conference. Up to that point, there had been rumors, speculation, backstage chatter. But this time, the response was direct enough to make it clear that something concrete was happening. According to him, the agreement was very advanced, entering its final moments, even without an official confirmation from the buying club at that exact instant. The practical consequence of that movement was immediate. Guéhi would not take the pitch in the next match. Not because of injury, not because of suspension, but because when a player reaches this final stage of negotiation, the risk no longer makes sense. One mistimed challenge, one collision, one physical issue, and everything can collapse. When the buying club and the player have already aligned on the desire to move forward, the gears start turning fast. The manager was clear in explaining how this kind of situation works in modern football. Every athlete, especially when approaching the end of a contract, begins to carry a very specific market value. There comes a moment when the selling club understands that the offer makes sense, and the player feels it is the right time to change. When those two decisions meet, the deal happens. The tone was not cold, quite the opposite. There was an almost melancholic note when he spoke about what might have been. The idea of keeping Guéhi for much longer, seeing him continue as captain, growing even more within the club, was something everyone wanted. But football rarely allows perfect endings. Financial reality, sporting reality, and ambition end up speaking louder. For the supporters, it feels like a loss that was announced, but still painful. It is not easy to accept that a 25-year-old stepping into the peak of his career is about to leave, especially when he represents stability, leadership, and identity on the pitch. Even knowing the contract was running down, there was always that hope of a late twist. As if that wasn't heavy enough, the press conference brought another element that made the day even harder. When asked about possible impacts of Guéhi's departure on the decision about his own future, the manager surprised people. He made it clear that his personal decision had been taken months ago, long before any market movement involving players. According to him, that conversation happened back in October, during the international break. A long dinner, an honest exchange with no outside noise. In that moment, he informed the club's leadership that he did not intend to renew his contract at the end of the season. Not because of conflict, not because of wear and tear, but because of a personal choice to seek a new challenge in his career. What is most striking is that this information was kept under wraps for months. In an environment where almost everything leaks, where any detail becomes a headline, this decision remained restricted to very few people. Manager and board continued working together professionally, keeping total focus on the team's performance. He made a point of stressing that the decision had nothing to do with the transfer window, with potential player exits, or with external pressures. It was a private choice, matured over time, and communicated early precisely to avoid bigger noise later on. There was also a moment of venting. Dealing with rumors, speculation, and distorted interpretations was not easy. He made clear his frustration with stories that did not reflect the truth, and the difficulty of staying silent while wrong versions circulated. Even so, he kept his stance, prioritizing the good of the club above any external narrative. The commitment, according to him, remains intact until the final day. The promise made to the players was direct, to give everything to make that season the best in Crystal Palace's history. There will be no easing off, no early transition. There will be work, responsibility, and respect for the institution. For Palace supporters, the weight of the day piles up. First, the confirmation that the manager will not continue. Then, the clear sense that Guéhi leaving now is far more likely than ever. Two major pieces of news concentrated within a few hours that changed the mood and the club's planning. This is where the information from people close to the market comes in. The update was straightforward. The agreement is practically done. City were the club that truly showed concrete interest in getting it over the line now. Other giants were watching too, yes, but with a different strategy, waiting to sign him for free in the summer. Clubs like Liverpool, Bayern Munich, and Arsenal were attentive, ready to talk later on. The problem is that waiting would have meant taking on a huge risk. Entering a bidding war with multiple giants, all offering sporting projects and competitive wages, could take control of the situation away. Manchester City did not want to take that risk. With clear needs in the squad and a well-defined strategic view, they decided to move quickly, pay now to secure the player, avoid heavy competition later, and fix an immediate weakness in the team. From their perspective, the logic is crystal clear. This movement also reinforces the idea that City's window has been extremely efficient. It is not about signing for the sake of signing, but about targeting players who are ready, adapted to the Premier League, capable of delivering a high level from the first moment. Look at it through that lens, and the move makes even more sense. Guéhi's age weighs heavily in this equation. At 25, he is neither a raw prospect nor a veteran in decline. He is a defender in his physical prime, with top-level experience and room to improve even further within a demanding environment. For a club fighting for everything, that profile is close to perfect. But on the other side of the table, the debate is unavoidable. For Crystal Palace, what was the best path? Take the money now, or hold on until the end and risk losing everything with no financial return? That is the question dividing the fan base and sparking intense debate. One group understands that for a club of Palace's stature, walking away from a significant fee is not viable. Losing an asset of that level without compensation could compromise planning, replacement, and growth. That argument has been sustained by the board for months. Another group looks at the sporting side. Keeping Guéhi until the end could increase the chances of a historic campaign, European qualification, perhaps a place that changes the club's level. For many, being in Europe would be worth more than any immediate fee. That tension between now and the future, between money and the dream, defines a large part of decision-making in modern football. And it is exactly there that this story becomes so symbolic and so relevant for understanding how clubs move. This split in feeling inside Crystal Palace does not come out of nowhere. It is the result of years of slow construction, of a club that learned to survive in the top flight while knowing exactly where it stands. Every decision carries huge weight because mistakes are costly. When you talk about losing a player of Marc Guéhi's level for nothing, the impact is not only sporting, it is structural. Palace know that producing or recruiting a center-back of that caliber is not simple. It involves time, patience, and minimal margin for error. When a player reaches that level, he becomes a strategic asset. Letting that asset leave for free, however noble the idea of keeping him until the end for sporting ambition might sound, can create a dangerous domino effect in the club's planning. Internally, the view was always clear. If an offer considered fair arrived, the exit would be inevitable. This did not start now. In the summer, the message was already the same. The club could not afford to repeat past stories where important talents left without compensation, forcing rushed rebuilds. So when Manchester City came in with a concrete offer, the scenario changed quickly. It was no longer distant speculation, but real, immediate money that could be reinvested. And not only that, there was also the understanding that the player himself was ready to take that step. From Guéhi's side, the decision also follows a clear logic. At 25, he knows he is entering the most decisive moment of his career. Playing for a club that fights for national and international titles, offering elite structure, a competitive squad, and maximum visibility, matters a lot. It is not only about money or status, it is about professional trajectory. Moving into an environment like Manchester City means living with maximum demands every day. Every training session, every match, every tactical decision is made at the limit. For some players, that is intimidating. For others, it is exactly what drives the next leap. Everything suggests Guéhi fits that second profile. City, in turn, see the signing as almost mandatory. The season showed that relying on too few options at center-back is a risk that is simply too high. Injuries exposed weaknesses, improvised adaptations cost points, and for a club used to competing for everything, these details make the difference. Choosing to bring the deal forward removes several uncertainties. There is no fight with other giants, no inflated auction, no risk of the player choosing another project. You pay now, solve the problem now, and the squad gains depth immediately. That strategy also sends a clear message to the market. City do not wait to be pressured. When they identify a need, they act. When they see an opportunity aligned with the desired profile, they do not hesitate. That strengthens the club's image and makes life harder for direct rivals. In the middle of it all, Palace's managerial situation becomes even more relevant. The confirmation that he will leave at the end of the season changes how every decision is interpreted. There is no longer room for long-term projects built around continuity of the coaching staff. The focus becomes closing the cycle in the best possible way. For the squad, that clarity can be painful, but also liberating. Knowing exactly where you stand avoids noise, rumors, and insecurity. Players know the manager will remain committed until the end, but they also understand changes are coming. That alters the atmosphere, but not necessarily in a negative way. The challenge now is maintaining balance. Losing a defensive leader affects the team's structure, collective confidence, and on-pitch organization. It will be on the manager to find solutions, adjust pieces, perhaps accelerate processes that were only planned for the future. At the same time, the board takes on a huge responsibility. The money that comes in must be used intelligently. It is not enough to replace for the sake of replacing. They will need to identify a profile that keeps the competitive level and fits within a period of technical transition. For the supporters, the feeling is mixed. There is frustration, there is fear, but there is also a growing understanding that modern football imposes hard choices. Holding out of pride can be expensive. Selling with strategy, even when it hurts, can guarantee stability. For Manchester City, the move reinforces an extremely strong window. These are not distant future gambles, but ready players, adapted, able to respond immediately. That matters in a heavy calendar, with multiple competitions and minimal margin for error. Guéhi's fit, if officially confirmed, tends to be quick. Premier League experience, reading of the game, physical strength, and tactical maturity are traits that ease adaptation. This is not an athlete who will need months to understand the rhythm or intensity of the league. In the wider picture, this negotiation also serves as an example for other mid-table clubs in the league. It shows it is possible to negotiate with giants without completely losing control of the narrative, as long as there is planning and firmness in decisions. Football is made of cycles. Crystal Palace close an important chapter, while Manchester City open another strategic move in their constant pursuit of excellence. In the middle of it is a player in his prime, ready to take on new challenges and handle new pressure. In the end, nobody comes out untouched from a decision like this. There are losses, there are gains, there are risks. But there is also coherence. When you analyze the full context, it becomes clear this story was not born from improvisation, but from choices thought through over time. If you enjoyed this content, leave a like now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because that makes all the difference for us to keep bringing deep analysis, well-connected information, and everything that truly matters in football.